5th of March, 1941. Damp air over Whitehall. Arthur Pennington locks a file drawer. He is an industrial planner. German bombers have been breaking machine shops faster than new ones can be built, so his goal is simple and hard. Keep RAF squadrons flying despite the wreckage. He chooses a strange tool, official paperwork that names forges no one can visit. On the page, he will raise dummy firms and empty addresses, so that orders, funds, and steel can flow to real hands in small rooms far from the blast. If anyone asks to see the sites, the map and the ground will not match, and the trick will be naked. He weighs that risk and turns the key. On the 6th of March, 1941, he sits in a room where only the clock moves and reads the night's reports line by line. 2 forges in the Midlands are marked as total losses. Roofs gone, bays collapsed, furnaces cold in water and ash. He puts a pencil mark next to the part codes those shops fed, crankshafts, piston rings, con rods, and draws arrows to the assembly dates they supported. Deadlines slip as the arrows cross out of the month. He does not guess. He writes the new dates into the margins and watches the gap open between what the squadrons asked for and what the ground can give. He drags a blotter toward him and pulls out a ruler. Brickwork and steel girder orders have lead times measured in months. Foundations wait on surveyors and cement, then fitters, then power. He draws a bar for each step and shades the idle days for weather and labor. The shaded part is longer than the white. The bars run to summer. The flying schedule does not. If he commits to new buildings, he will meet no aircraft this month. Because of that, any plan that lives in concrete is already late. He turns from the building times to the readiness tables and traces down the columns for squadrons. The number of grounded aircraft is climbing. The notes on the right do not say enemy action as often as he expects. They say awaiting parts. He runs a finger along the rows and sees the same codes he circled on the damaged sheets. The failure is not only from bombs. It is from parts locked behind a few large doors. Because the doors are few and known, the delays spread. He writes bottleneck on the blotter and draws a narrow neck between intake and output to fix the picture in his head. He leaves his chair and goes past the procurement desks to the corridor where carts of forms wait. Each stack is a tower of vendor codes, requisition numbers, and stamps. He stops and reads the top sheet of one pile. A clerk has entered a supplier, a rate, and a delivery term that will move money and steel by itself once the stamp falls. No one is going to the building to check a roof. They are going to the file to check a number. The system trusts paper more than rumors. Because paper moves within the day and bricks do not, he can use it. He goes back to his room and writes a new line on the blotter. Move the flow on paper. On the 7th of March, 1941, he starts a new list. He looks at the build standards and makes a column for parts that do not demand big hammer presses or deep furnaces. Bushings, shims, fittings, covers, things that can be cut, turned, milled, and hardened in small ovens. He writes tolerance, finish, and heat as headings and fills rows with what a general workshop can meet. A dozen small hands could replace one broken bay if the orders and stock find them in time. Therefore, the key is not skill alone, it is routing. He thinks of a cold week months ago when stores went missing. The inquiry ended with a plain cause. One index number in the inventory table sent crates to a depot that did not match the route plan. The change had been a single digit. He had stared at that number then and learned where fields feed other fields. He pulls that memory forward now. If a line in a vendor table can shift deliveries without touching the master drawings, then the control point is not the machine. It is the code. He circles the fields on a form where a supplier's name, address, and classification are typed, and he notes which fields echo into transport, inspection, and pay. Maps spread across his desk, but he does not need a photo to tell him which places draw eyes. He marks in pencil the plants with roofs the size of parade grounds and smokestacks that write their names on the sky. Those are the sites that cast shadows on enemy photos. If output grows at such places, it will gather fire again. Therefore, any increase must not stand up on the ground. It has to live where maps cannot point. Inside ledgers that name firms no one can bomb. He writes small crosses over the obvious giants and pens a line under ledger, as if to press the word into the page. On the 8th of March, 1941, he runs a test without flames. He fills a supplier entry with a harmless name and a quiet street that exists on post records, but holds nothing related to steel. He assigns it a classification for non-critical hardware and raises a single order for a part that will not stop a Spitfire if it fails to arrive. A batch of grease nipples and washers for ground equipment. If the system accepts the new supplier and issues funds without a site inspection, the path is open. If it flags the mismatch, the idea dies before it spreads. He carries the docket in his hand and watches it move. The first stamp falls at the registration desk. The second is at accounts, where the supplier code writes itself into the pay book. Later, he stands by a door as a messenger takes the docket to stores. He makes notes on which clerks glance at addresses and which only check that the fields are filled and the totals add. He learns that once a name has a code, it repeats into other lists without a visit. The echo is automatic. Because of that, a false name can be made real by the act of typing it and stamping it once. By late afternoon, he has enough to set an aim that is not a sketch but a program. He will build a net of paper-only forges, entries that hold orders, funds, and allowances for steel and coal. Those entries will not make a single part. They will receive work and then, by private arrangements, push it to real shops that do not look important and are spread so wide that no single blast can silence them all. He can keep the master specifications the same so the aircraft do not change. The risk is not in the metal. It is in discovery. If an audit lifts the cover, the names will be blamed and he will be the one who wrote them. He writes that cost next to the aim and does not strike it out. The need is larger. Because the sky is already short of parts, he is choosing the ledger over the brick. And from that choice, something that does not exist on the ground may still feed the air. On the 10th of March, 1941, he sits with a fresh stack of blank supplier forms and writes entries that could pass as any other line in a ledger. He chooses names that sound like firms listed in trade books, simple, stout words that match how real British shops call themselves. Addresses point to streets with real postmen and numbers, but with doors that open to grocers or sheds, not furnaces. He gives each entry middling classifications and payment terms that match the wartime norm. An ordinary face on paper raises fewer eyebrows than a clever one. He files them and watches for stamps. He builds a second list in pencil, small workshops reachable by short lorry runs. He marks places he has seen, and places inspectors told him still have intact lathes, belt drives, and small ovens that can take a simple hardening cycle. He notes who keeps gauges clean and who delivers on time. Some are family shops behind terraces, some low sheds near canals, some attached to garages. He pairs each real workshop with a different phantom name upstream, never letting two shops drink from the same paper well. If a names list is ever pulled, no single entry will point back to a cluster of output. The scatter is the shield. He takes a thick contract for engine fittings and cuts it down into many small orders that sit under routine limits, because those limits are where no extra committee or inspection is triggered. A dozen orders for 200 items move faster than one for a few thousand. It costs more in stamps, docket numbers, and accounting lines, but it buys speed and silence. He staggers due dates so nothing peaks in a way that would draw a graph's eye. For the first wave, he selects parts with simple gauges, pins, collars, rings, metal shapes that a steady hand and a good micrometer can meet without long oversight. Early wins will be seen as proof that these names deliver. On the 12th of March, 1941, he sets routes that keep lorries to lanes at night. The driver will back to a rear door, load crates, and go. No new signage on any wall, no bright lights to tell a camera where to look. He standardizes crate marks, a stencil with a code that matches the phantom name on the depot's intake board, a part code, and a date, so the depot can sort by labels without caring about their source. The rows in the warehouse map still line up with expected labels. A crate that says Forge X goes to the same bin as any other. He writes the key that links phantom to real on a single card he carries in his inner pocket. If his desk is searched, the list stays with him, not with his files. He watches the flow for pauses. A district office holds a new name for review and the docket does not receive its second stamp. He takes a second phantom entry already registered, raises a twin order, and reroutes the part through that path. The first delay becomes a shadow, not a blockage. He keeps notes, not on the card but in his head, about which clerks glance at addresses and which only check that totals add. A woman at one desk prefers Engineering Co. to Works. A man down the hall asks for a telephone number if the street is new to him. He bends the next names to fit those habits, because fitting the rhythm of people is as important as fitting the rule. He takes a day to train a single driver who will be his hands past the ledger. The man learns a route by landmarks, not by written map, and receives sealed slips that tell only the next step: collect here, deliver there, return before dawn. The slips do not name the phantom firms or the real shops beyond what the next door demands. Workers see a crate leave their bench and head to a depot, and that is all they need to know. If the driver is stopped and questioned, he can show a slip that speaks to his present errand and nothing else. Compartmenting keeps the chain intact if one link is pulled. On the 14th of March, 1941, the depot floor shows a line of crates from 5 different towns under 3 different phantom names. The wood smells of oil and sawdust. Chalk numbers scuff under boots. A clerk reads the stencils, makes entries, and sends them to bins. Intake is normal on the book because the labels are names the book already knows. No one asks to see the forge that made them. The parts are small and correct. They pass inspection, they count toward the week's total. He marks which desks asked after an oddity, the shape of a stamp, a missing hyphen, and adjusts the next batch's marks to match what those desks expect to see. He avoids using any one phantom too often. When he imagines a tally drawn by a cautious mind, he wants a pattern of many small lights, not a single flare. Because the scheme can warp honest trade if let run wild, he sets a ceiling on volume per phantom name and rotates work among many real shops. Families keep wages across more streets, and no one place grows so fat with orders that it draws envy or attention. The rotation also means a bomb cannot starve a part overnight. He knows the harm a forged entry could do if someone used it for private gain. The same masks that hide a line from enemy eyes could also steal from the treasury. He guards the card and the roots because of that, and he carries the weight of that choice when he buttons his jacket each night. He reads the week's final tallies with a still face. The depot's intake chart shows no kink, no new peak at a known giant, only a steady line rising with the schedule. The RAF's waiting lists for small fittings shortened by a handful of days. On paper, anonymous forges have met their dates, and money has moved where the forms say it should. On the ground, real hands in back rooms have done the work. The difference between map and street lives in his pocket as a small card. If he is stopped, it ends with him. If he keeps walking, aircraft that would have sat will fly, and the enemy will search for a factory that never stood. On the 17th of March, 1941, he stands at the intake desk and reads the tired eyes of the depot clerk before the man speaks. The clerk's tray is thick with mismatched totals and stray dockets that chase each other in circles. Arthur asks for 5 minutes and lays out an offer that sounds like housekeeping, not favor. He will send a plain sheet each week that lists part codes, expected crates by date, and a simple count of what came in versus what was due. He will match stencil marks to ledger lines so the clerk does not have to hunt across files. In return, routine entries pass without extra queries unless a total is off by more than a small number. The clerk nods because less chaos means a shorter day. Because of that, the stream of labels with his phantom names will meet fewer questions at the desk that feeds the bins. That evening he takes a slow train and then walks the last mile under a deadened sky to a workshop behind a terrace. The foreman meets him at the door with oil on his sleeves and worry in his voice. They speak by the light of a single lamp about what can and cannot be held to a line, how tight the pin must fit, how smooth a collar must be, how long the oven must glow to harden a small ring without warping. The foreman's question is not about pride, it is about pay. When will cash hit the bank and will crates be lifted on time, not promised and then forgotten? Arthur sets his hand flat on the bench and answers with dates he can keep. Tuesdays and Fridays after dark, same hour each week, and wages 2 days later. He chooses a pair of parts with tolerances the foreman's gauges can prove and leaves a clean drawing and a written due. Trust is not a speech. It is a crate gone on the night agreed. He adds a driver to the chain the next morning, a quiet man whose knuckles sit white on a wheel but do not shake. The man knows hedgerows, railway arches, and the hollow hill where sound dies for a moment when you pass. He has burned in his head the places where searchlights crawl and the corners where wardens stand. Arthur tells him that his loads will be small and late, and that there is pay for care, not speed. The man agrees because the work skirts the centers that burn brightest, and because the sealed slips speak only to the next stop, not to any plan larger than a turn in the dark. Therefore, pickup runs can dodge bridges the enemy photographs and roads the police prefer, and yet the depot will see crates when it expects them. The driver holds a fragment and only that. He goes upstairs to a room of women bent over columns. One of them, in a unit that keeps the numbers that feed the war, has drawn her own small graphs on scrap. He asks her to watch readiness not by aircraft alone, but by part code, to mark in pencil where weights are rising for rings versus bearings versus pins. She agrees because it is her work to see what lines mean. 2 days later, she slides him a page with a quiet arrow next to a set of codes he gave to only one phantom name. He shifts those orders to 2 other names and moves some simple work off a bottleneck he had not seen from his chair. He thanks her and says no more. He tells none of them the whole plan, the clerk, the foreman, the driver, the analyst. Each has a piece that stands up on its own. If an inspector leans on any one of them, they can tell a true story and still not touch the spine of what he is building. On the 20th of March, 1941, a bomb takes brick and glass 2 streets from a listed address that has never had a forge behind it. By noon, an internal query sits on his blotter asking for an inspection visit to check that work continues. He reads the line twice and feels time thin. He has hours before a man with a clipboard turns a corner and finds a shop that never stood. He pulls the supplier file and moves the correspondence to a mundane office that can take a knock on the door without alarm. A railway store's annex with a back room used for broken pallets and tea. He rings a supervisor he trusts there and asks for an empty table and a page in a ledger. He directs a lorry to drop 2 crates painted with neutral stencils and a date that matches the forms. No furnace, no din, only boxes and a neat list are what he wants seen. The inspector arrives in a brown coat with a pencil that has been sharpened too many times. Arthur stands 1 pace behind him and answers the questions that match the form, not the place. The labels on the crates match the entries. The ledger columns add. The man ticks a box and thanks the room for its time. When the door closes, Arthur breathes and feels a heat that does not come from any oven. Lying to a man who keeps faith for a living is a stain he cannot wash, so he takes out a slip and writes a hard rule to himself. Any phantom entry that draws a second visit will be cut at once, work diverted, and name retired. He pins the note under his blotter where only his hand will find it. That afternoon he hears, by way of a driver's half-sentence, that one foreman's son took shrapnel in a raid the night before. He sees the man's face as it was in the lamp light and thinks of a bed in a ward. He adds an extra run to that shop's week without waiting for a request, and he moves its due dates to avoid weekends so wages land midweek when cash at the grocer matters most. It is a small thing against a wound, but steady work is a way to steady a house. He writes the adjustment into the sheet for the depot clerk, so no one downstream is forced to guess why one set of crates is coming early. A banker calls a line manager somewhere, and a question rises about a payment tied to a name that looks thin under a stamp. The docket lands on Arthur's desk with a clip that means stop. He faces the choice he has tried to put off. Either let the query bloom into letters and visits, or break his quiet with someone who can close it with one mark. He walks 2 flights to a senior official whose jacket never looks creased and says only that a store's payment for urgent air work must go through today. The man looks at him once and writes the word that melts the question. The file returns to him without a trace of trouble, but he knows what he has done. He has put his own face near a rule that hides what he is doing behind urgency. If a light ever falls on this, it will fall on where his name sits. He sleeps at his desk for 2 nights and wakes each time with a crick in his neck and the same thought in his mouth. Every signature he moves pulls a thread attached to someone who trusts him. The weight does not slow his hands. It tightens them. He takes the risk and toward himself in the next round. He shifts approvals so that the sensitive parts of the flow need his code alone. He stops leaving any hint of the mapping between phantom and real in places others can even guess at. He trims back the number of names he uses at once so he can watch each one like a door he has to lock himself. Outside his window the siren lifts and drops. Inside, he marks which lines he will carry so that the driver, the clerk, the foreman, and the analyst can keep doing their narrow, true jobs. He knows that what he moves is not just metal. It is days and wages, and the chance that an aircraft that would not have flown will lift into cloud while an enemy map points to a forge that never breathed. 24th of March, 1941. Gray light on his blotter. Arthur reads a morning brief that says enemy analysts are mapping British output by tall chimneys and rail spurs. He holds a captured leaflet that marks a major forge in a district on his list that is only a mail point and a rent office. He runs a fingernail under the printed name and sees the gap between their site and his ledger. Because his entries avoid chimneys and sidings, no extra bombs follow his labels. He draws a soft pencil line around that district on his map and evens the schedule there, so the intake stays steady and flat. The illusion holds because he does not let it shine. On the 26th of March, 1941, an internal audit flags repeated deliveries by names with thin files. A visit is set to sample parts and check that line items match what the depot sees. He cannot show a building that does not stand, so he chooses to show results. He walks through his list of small shops and lifts finished pieces that meet the same drawing. He makes one pallet that holds collars, pins, and rings in nested trays, each wrapped in oiled paper and tagged with the same phantom invoice. He writes matching lot numbers and dates, and he lays a clean copy of the inspection drawing on top. He asks the depot to have gauges ready and a clear table. If the parts pass, the ledger breathes. The auditor arrives with a short ruler and a calm face. He picks at random. Arthur watches the go-no-go gauge slide over a pin and stop where it should. Micrometers click shut. A ring passes the hardness file without a scratch. The tally on the form matches counts on the pallet. The man writes a small note that means pass and moves on. Arthur notes which surface finishes drew a second look, and which stamps looked odd on paper. He tweaks the next batch so the bluing matches one shop's habit and the scribed lines sit the same way. The ledger survives this round because steel on a table answers more cleanly than talk. That night, a raid cuts the sky into white beams and black space. A courier bag that holds documents for 2 phantom names fails to arrive. Arthur takes his coat and traces the route by memory, under a railway arch, past a brick wall with a broken poster, then left where the cobbles swell. He finds the driver shaking but whole in a doorway, and the bag in a puddle, soaked and heavy. The pages smear when he lifts them. He reads enough to know that if any part of that ink falls into the wrong hands, a check could start. Because of that, he retires those entries at once. He crosses them off his card, pulls their orders, and moves their work to names still clean. He rings accounts to freeze payments, burns the ruined slips, and adjusts stencils so no crate arrives with a mark tied to a dead file. On the 28th of March, 1941, a readiness sheet shows a drop in a squadron's line. The note is blunt, shortage of a specific shaft. He moves that item to the front of his phantom queue and doubles the pickup run. He calls 2 shops that can turn and grind to the long fit the shaft needs, and he books time in a small case-hardening oven behind a bicycle works 2 towns away. He splits the heat treatment across 2 nights so one oven fault cannot ruin the lot. He writes new routes so lorries lift the crates between the siren hours. Because the need is sharp, parts move without extra flourishes. By the 31st of March, 1941, the unit reports serviceable aircraft back above the line. A senior sends him a terse note that guesses more than it states and tells him to keep the wheels turning. It is not sanction on paper, but it is tolerance if the line holds. On the 1st of April, 1941, an auditor asks to see a furnace. Arthur cannot walk him to a door that will answer that request. He offers a different proof, a demonstration at the depot where parts arrive and pass inspection. He sets the hour and sends 3 crates to land as the man stands by the table. Labels match forms, parts match drawings, inspection stamps match the depot's own marks. The war's pace rewards what works, and the man accepts that a hot flame is less important to him than a finished piece that fits. Arthur writes a private rule afterward. Never promise a step on a path he cannot show. Promise only the proof that matters to the aircraft. When he totals the month, the numbers rise again in the columns tied to phantom names. Intake for pins, rings, and small shafts grows in a steady way, not a spike. That steadiness lets him keep his cover quiet. A new raid lands on a real shop that had just raised its shutters. Brick and roof go down. He moves its orders within the hour across 6 small places he has already tested, and he shifts the heat work to 2 rural ovens that do not draw eyes. Wages still arrive on the days he promised, and the depot sees crates when it expects them. Because the weight is spread, the aircraft do not wait. He knows this cannot live forever. Paper can guide flow in a storm, but in clear weather the system must run with its true names. He drafts a quiet plan to fold the most stable small shops into the official lists under their own signs. He writes criteria in pencil: on-time runs for 6 months, gauges held to standard, no inspection flags, a place on a map that a man can find without tricks. When the danger eases, he will let the phantom names die without drama and leave behind clean files that any clerk can stamp without looking twice. What remains at the end of the month is not a building, but a line that bends up where it had dipped. He has carried risk in his pocket to buy days for people he will never meet, and the cost sits with him even when no siren sounds. The enemy still reads chimneys. His ledgers still give them fog instead of targets. If the war's test is whether aircraft rise when called, his work is counted in takeoffs, not in walls, and his fate is tied to a quiet fact. As long as the line of serviceable machines holds above the mark, the forges he made out of forms will exist enough for the sky. In early April 1941, he holds the small card once more, then feeds it to a match and watches the list lift in smoke. He keeps only parts totals because that is all anyone should need now. A few of the back rooms that proved themselves take their place under their own signs in the official lists, and he retires the phantom names without noise. He asks no one to notice. The proof is on the readiness lines and in aircraft that lift when called. What he carries from the month is plain. When steel is too slow to build, paper can still move hands to action. In that choice, his fate meets a wider line. His invisible forges kept the RAF aloft when bricks could not, and the course of the war bent on work that never stood on any map.